Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 236, season 5, episode 23. We begin the third book of Moses, the third books of the 5 books of Moses, the book known as Leviticus, for the 5th time in our work together. Each time we've come at it from a different perspective and we've tried different things. And this year we're going to try something new as well. First, a moment of gratitude. If you're watching the video of this, you see I'm still wearing the t-shirt from today. I ran a 10K today, my first official 10K. I look how I feel. I'm exhausted. Part of my body hurts a lot, my feet mostly. But more than anything, I'm just appreciative of the opportunity to do it and grateful that I was able to complete it, as physically hard as it was. Running the 10K in Jerusalem today with thousands and thousands of other people. The only negative was that they put me in the category of 50 to 59, and I'm not yet 50. So even though it helped my placement when I finished, I didn't place particularly well because the 40 to 49 group, I think, was far better in terms of athletic prowess. It says a lot, just the ability to run a 10K at the age of almost 50. And I'm really thankful that I had the opportunity to do it. I really appreciate and thank my family for encouraging me to continue on this journey, to continue to work at this, and to support me in these somewhat, I think, crazy physical challenges that I seem to sometimes put myself through. So this was the 10. This is the longest official run that I have done, and who knows what's next. Running in Jerusalem is extraordinary. Just the number of people, the different kinds of people, and just the joy that's really on the street, even in this very tense and difficult time here, there just was a lot of joy. And a lot of great organizations were supported by great teams. And again, the context, a lot of people were running in memory of someone. Soldier who was killed, a family member who was killed. And you just saw the t-shirts and you just saw the people in the groups that were running in honor of those people, in celebration of those people's lives, but certainly in memory of them as well. It just added a different level. And seeing the streets of Jerusalem that way, running through parts of the old city of Jerusalem, which I've never done before, was different, and it was great. So I'm really glad I got a chance to do that. I am exhausted, but I am pushing forward and getting this week's episode out. Again, season 5, episode 23. Episode 236. And so we're beginning this new series, which we're calling The Inner Leader, or The Leader Within, because what we want to do here is appreciate at a more personal level what happens with the leader. The book itself, Leviticus, is different than the other books because it's quieter. It's focused on ritual and restriction and purity and holiness and sanctity, and it just doesn't have the narrative. It has 2 narrative sections in the entire book, dramatic and important, but it comes at us from a different perspective, the idea that this is the book that is often called the Torah of the priests, or the Book of the Priests. I don't think that's unique and limited to just the high priest and the family of the priests. I think that's about the idea of elevating ourselves and raising ourselves to be priestly beings. And so if that's true, then the book is very much about character formation and emotional maturity and discipline, moral discipline. Because when we think about leadership doesn't always start with charisma or command. It starts with self-awareness. It starts with alignment. It starts with answering a call, which is the subject of this week's conversation, even when that call is quiet. In this season, there's the tiredness. In this section of episodes, we're going to explore the internal work of being a leader. What does it mean to live with intention? How do we build the habits that reflect our values? What does it take to carry responsibility with dignity and grace? There's a lot of that we're going to explore over the next 10, 11, 12 weeks. We begin, though, with not a grand act, but with a small letter and a whispered invitation. This series, this section, this week is called The Call You Almost Missed. We're going to talk about the concept of callings, not in the way that it was, I think, on some level ruined by the book, the show Manifest. As a family, we watched that television show. It was hard to watch because the acting is terrible, but it was one of those things that was hard to put down. But it very much centers around the concept of callings, and but really talking about the idea of being called to leadership. And the reality of it is that the call to lead rarely arrives with a lot of fanfare. More often, it's a whisper. Most often, it's missed. And the reality of that call is that it's deeply consequential even when it's missed. And the book of Leviticus opens not with drama, but with what I like to think of as a whisper. The book opens, and he, that's in capital, he, that's God, called to Moses. But when you look at the word called in an actual Torah scroll, that last letter of it is an aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is written small. It's a textual anomaly that obviously is there for a reason. It has a purpose, and it's something that is worthy of a conversation. So as I said, the beginning of Leviticus begins with this quiet call. The small aleph, that and in that word, Vayikra, that's the Hebrew word, has intrigued commentaries over the centuries. Many note the contrast to the word Vayikra, which is another Hebrew word which God uses and the Bible uses when God appears to other people, specifically the prophet known as Bilam in Hebrew, or Balaam in English, which that term in translation, I'm going to slow down here, implies a chance encounter. The word Vayikra, the word that's used here to open up this book, even with the small aleph, even with that small letter, reflects an actual call, a call of intimacy, a call of purpose, a call that is deliberate in nature. Moses, in his humility, it is said according to our lore, wrote the letter small. In fact, he didn't want to write the letter at all. He wanted to have his version of being called to service, being called to God, be mirrored or matching those of others. He didn't want distinction. He didn't want separation. He didn't want to be shown as different. As we know, when Moses was actually called to the job, he felt an unworthiness, a hesitation, a resistance to taking the role, and that seems to persist to a degree, even now, we're talking about many, many months later. That sense of feeling unworthy, or the idea that there's no want or desire to exaggerate the person's own centrality to the divine plan, which Moses sits at the center of that. But there is no way that God is going to allow for that experience to be noted or written down or described in the same way that it is for a prophet such as Bilam. And so here we're going to explore the idea of calling, how we recognize it, why we often are resistant to it, and how do we cultivate the ability to hear and then to respond. And so the idea then with respect to that small aleph, let's sit in that for just a moment, is not just, as I said, not a scribal detail that it just accidentally one time was written with a small letter and it stuck. No, it's deliberate. And it leads to a very important insight here, is the idea of Moses on some level struggling, wrestling with the role that he plays, wrestling maybe with the centrality of the role that he plays, wrestling with the nature of the relationship that Moses had with God, which is different and unique than everybody else, especially when called. We know from the book of Exodus that after Moses spends the time on the mountain with God, that his face shone. And so he's different, he's separate, he's apart, his calling is bigger. And what we have to appreciate that even though he has a desire to perhaps eliminate that letter from the text, it's there. And it implies something very important. The call to leadership is real. The call to leadership isn't always felt to be deserved. And the call to leadership is not always clear. But the call to leadership is a response to a deliberate call, even when the person feels inadequate, even when the person continues to feel inadequate over the passage of time. And that's the case with Moses. So let's understand that. Now, the reality of it is that we're not all called during the course of our lifetime. I don't think everybody has a calling, or maybe everyone has a calling. Maybe this is a better way to say it. There is calling for everyone, but perhaps in many cases we don't want it, we miss it. It's not big enough. We're not happy with it. We don't even see it perhaps as calling. And so what I want to begin here now with is the idea first about calling itself. Calling is more than a career. It is more in thinking about it from the standpoint of depth. It's almost a summons towards a purpose that matters. It involves service. It involves growth. It involves a heavy sense of meaning. Philosophers and psychologists alike have explored the concept of calling. It always begins in a religious context, but it doesn't fully exist and only exist in a religious context today. So one, the gentleman by the name of Frederick, I think it's pronounced Buechner, describes calling as where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Some have called that a place where your passion lives. That may be true also, but I think that's very much where your calling lives. It's a place where you feel good in that space and where the world's need, the deep hunger for that space is also in that same, it's where that Venn diagram overlaps. And psychologists have studied it even further. A gentleman by the name of William Damon studied it with respect to youth, that those younger people who felt purpose in life, purpose with their work, what he called a calling mindset, showed higher resilience, higher levels of satisfaction, higher motivation. And just the last one, I think, that really describes it really nicely. The calling is almost a sense of a transcendent type of summons, and something that's experienced perhaps beyond the self, where you're now approaching work and life with a different sense of purpose, different level of responsibility, maybe a different level of accountability. And I would say with a different approach where you're more on offense as opposed to on defense. And so the characteristics of calling, I think, are transcendent and divine on some level. It connects personally with the person's meaning and their broader contribution to the world. That's their impact. There's a lot of resistance that comes with calling, hesitation, fear, a sense of unworthiness. But when the person steps into calling and steps into that leadership role, then there's a deep change. It's an irrevocable change. It's a transformation of the person. They're no longer the person they were before. Just to give it not the perfect context, but one of my favorite movies is The Ten Commandments. It's a good time to talk about it. Cecil B. DeMille's version, Charlton Heston playing Moses, in my mind still to this day. Moses looks like Charlton Heston, even though I know for sure he didn't. I know for sure that he didn't because Charlton Heston was not a Middle Eastern man by birth, but that's a side point. But there's a moment in the film when he first comes down from the burning bush moment, from the burning bush experience, and he looks different. And in that moment in the film, Zephra, Zipporah, Joshua, who's there, and I don't know why he's there, but he's there, see Moses for the changed person that he is, the look in his eyes, the change of complexion on his face. I think his hair actually changes as well, because there's no longer the person that was there. But the reality of it is, for a lot of people, I think, is that when they felt a call, they wrestle with it. They don't want it. They're resistant to it. Moses at the burning bush. Jonah runs away. Jeremiah says he's too young. Esther fears for her life. Those are all biblical references. Check them out. All of them are in that space of when the moment of calling happens. And why are they resistant? There's a lot of reasons. And it's not because they deny that that's actually the calling for their mission in life. Perhaps it rests in the sense of imposter syndrome, right? That comes up a lot in leadership. It comes up a lot in coaching. We're working with a leader on the role that they play, the decisions they have to make, the actions they have to step into. Who am I to lead? It makes a lot of sense. We don't feel like we belong in that space. Sometimes it's out of humility. Sometimes it's out of fake humility, but sometimes it's, a lot of the time it's real. It's a sense of it's undeserved, but it also belongs to a space of what if I fail? There's a fear of being exposed as a failure, as a disappointment, sense that leader struggles with, the inner leader, when they're in those spaces, in those decisions, in those moments, and they know that they're called for this moment, but they're wrestling, they're struggling, they're anxious, they're tense. Maybe it comes from a desire for comfort. They'd rather somebody else do it. So why call me? Jonah runs away. Jonah's like, hey, there's got to be somebody else who could do this. There are other prophets around. Send somebody else. Moses says it explicitly. My brother is awesome. Take him. Choose him. And God gets angry with him. I'm not calling Aaron for this role. I'm calling you. Or maybe it's even simply just uncertainty. If the calling doesn't feel clear, that sense of being asked to do something isn't with 100% clarity. And so there's just even the smallest amount of ambiguity that surrounds it. So that anxiety that comes with it is enough to push a person away. The reality of it is those actual signs perhaps are even the actual signs that the calling is real. The internal friction that this person is having, which all those things signify, is that something big is being asked of us. And we also know that the call is not convenient, it's never simple, and it's not easy, which is why it's probably sacred. And so when it is that God whispers to Samuel at the beginning of his time in the house, in the tabernacle, he mistakes it at first. He thinks it's his mentor, Eli, who's calling him. He doesn't recognize it as the voice of God. It's a quiet call. Elijah, when he's broken and he's exhausted, he finds God in that very famous moment, not in the fire, not in the wind, but you know the rest, but in the still small voice. Because, core and key to leadership and core and key to the moment of the calling is listening. But not just listening for the loud calls, but for the subtle ones as well. The whispers, the ones you might miss. Those might be the voices that you need to hear that change everything. But I want to also bring it down into the real world because, as I mentioned earlier, yes, biblically speaking or historically speaking, the concept of being called to something was in a religious context. The call to be a religious leader, a religious figure, yes. But that is not always true because that idea of calling belongs at every different level of leadership and in many different contexts. Here's an example. Community organizer, a person who works community organizations, has an opportunity to go to a national role, to something very big, or even regional, something much, much bigger, much more lucrative, and decides to stay in the hometown, to serve her roots and to serve where her roots are planted. That's answering a call. It's a different level call. It's not Moses, but it's a different level call. It's the grandparent who showed up. Their child is, God forbid, widowed, perhaps divorced, struggling to make it work. The grandparent is retired. Grandpa or grandma, shows up on a consistent and regular basis to take care of the grandchildren, to pick them up from school, to make their lunch, to take them to after-school activities, to take them to the library, to just be there for them when they need someone because mom or dad can't be there. That's calling in a different concept than the Moses, Jonah, Jeremiah, Esther, presidential leadership, even armed forces calling. Because the reality of calling, I think, at that lower level, quote unquote, I don't think it's lower in any other sense. I think it's highly sanctified and holy. Doesn't require having this massive, giant platform. It simply requires that a person hears it in response. Many of the greatest leaders that have ever lived are not the loudest, are not the most celebrated, or are not even known. They're the ones who said yes when something sacred, something holy, something meaningful, something important, something tiny perhaps needed them. And so what's really important then for us is to appreciate the leader within, the inner leader on the call that you almost missed, or in other cases, you actually did miss. And so let's share a couple of practical tools so that we can become much, much better at this. Number one, I think is really crucial here is to cultivate stillness. It's very hard to do to create quiet time in the course of one's day because so many things and so many reasons come along that explain away the need to give that time to something else. They're good excuses. Oh, yeah, it's my quiet time, but okay, I'll give it a couple of minutes at the beginning of it and a couple minutes at the end of it. Leadership often arises in the space of the silence. when you have the opportunity to sit with yourself and to be with yourself and to think about the things you're doing and the things that you're not doing. Practical tool number 2 in that reflective mode of stillness is seeing the patterns. What are the things that keep pulling your attention? What are the things that people consistently and regularly come to you for? When you start to see the patterns, maybe that's advice, maybe that's talent, a skill that you have, maybe that's work ethic, maybe take your pick how many different things that is. That could be the calling. It may not be your profession, but it might be your calling. I know somebody for many years, I think he actually sells life insurance. His calling in life is a musician. When you ask him what he is, who he is, what's he called to be in this world, it's to create and bring beautiful music into the world. What does he do from 9 to 5? He sells life insurance, financial packages and financial planning to people. And when people reach out to him, it's not really always about the life insurance. It's very much about, hey, can you come play? And when his eyes are open and when he's paying attention, he's always seeking opportunities to lean into the space of his. Here's another one. Build the muscles of discernment. Muscles of discernment are the things that help to sharpen your eye, ear, mind around the things that are happening in and around your life. Sharpen those tools. Really work at them to see what's at the core, the heart of the things that are important to you. What do I have to respond to on a consistent and regular basis? You might get exasperated to think, again with this, again with that, whatever it may be. But when you appreciate that that's true, again, calling doesn't have to be passion. Calling doesn't have to be something you want to do. Calling is very much something that needs to be done, needs to happen, and you're the person called to do it. It's a very unique leadership space, and one I think that not everybody is brought into. Sit with those tools. They require you mostly to spend time with yourself and to think by and for yourself about yourself. It's a little bit selfish. I don't think in this context it's a bad thing, because I think the result is always better. That which you bring out, that which you bring to the fore, that which you share with the rest of the world is better because you took the time to reflect. And that's where the book of Leviticus starts off. The book of Leviticus is about service. It is about sacrifice, and it is about sanctity. But before any of that happens, it starts with a still, small, quiet call to Moses. Leadership, too, for ourselves doesn't begin with public declarations or titles. It begins when you notice the whisper and you say, as it often is said in the Bible, Hineni in Hebrew, here I am here, I am ready. That's where we start the 5th cycle of the book of Leviticus together. To finish it out with a great quote, this is a quote from Pablo Picasso. The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away, because sometimes the call you almost miss is the one you were made to answer. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week. I will not be running a 10K next week, but I look forward to seeing you next week as we prepare for the holiday of Passover.